Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp Inc., MGI on the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected high-grade gold, including 16.9 meters of 13.58 grams and 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program is planned to further evaluate previously identified subsurface high-grade gold mineralization. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin. He's also the publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
What kind of a legacy is Gregor Robertson going to be remembered for when he finally retires from being the boss of Vancouver?
I think he'll be remembered as this mayor who wanted to be green, but the green he really wanted was the color of money. And the color of money from property developers, real estate companies, construction companies. It really wasn't about a more sustainable city like the advertising was all about. Latest example of his legacy in action is that they're going to put temporary modular housing on the site of the old Little Mountain social housing development. It was a post-war development that was finally taken down about a decade ago, and people were displaced and evicted. The people that were living in subsidized housing were evicted because they were told that something newer and better was going to be built, and everything would be fine for all of these people, and it never got built. There's one building on the property near 33rd and Main that was built by developer Holborn, but Holborn could not see eye to eye with BC Housing and City of Vancouver and get its act together. It also, at the time of this real estate boom, had other priorities. One of its priorities was to build the Trump Tower on Georgia Street downtown with licensing of the Trump name and management of the hotel from the Trump organization. They went for the biggest profit possible instead of carrying through on promises to rebuild the Little Mountain social housing development. So here we are today in Vancouver. There was a news release issued about a temporary modular housing setup that'll be put on the site there, which is mostly vacant. So things have almost come full circle. Here you have Gregor Robertson, who promised to end street homelessness in Vancouver, and one of his legacies will be these temporary modular housing, essentially glorified work camp mobile housing that's being built around Vancouver to try to rescue a situation. It's not going to solve this by any means. It'll give a few people a chance to get into warm housing and maybe a chance to turn their lives around and become productive members of society that they weren't before because they had so many problems in their lives. Here you have this situation on a housing site which was very much in the news for a number of years. There were a lot of protests. The people that live there did not all go willingly. Some people stayed there as long as they could. And here you have this. They're going to put temporary modular housing on this site, which really should have been the site of permanent bricks and mortar social housing.
Why is it only temporary? Do they expect the housing problem to be solved in 5 years?
I think it's only temporary because that's the materials that these buildings are made of. They are supplied by a company that supplies portable buildings to work camps, to resource work camps. That's the kind of quality that's being placed at these installations. Of course, it'd be nice to dream that we wouldn't need these in the future, that everyone could find a home eventually, but that's a real long shot, especially after you've had someone who won election in 2008, was reelected in 2011, and then 2014 again, on the back of this housing promise that he was going to solve it by 2015. 2015 came and went. In fact, things got worse, and we are in the middle of a housing affordability crisis here in Vancouver. And also one of the latest news headlines in the federal scene is one of Gregor Robertsons' best friends, one of his big money donors to his campaign, Ian Gillespie of Westbank Properties. They're the company that's behind some of the most luxurious, most architecturally adventurous towers on the downtown Vancouver skyline. Well, they're cutting a deal that they're hoping to finalize with the Trudeau government for billions of dollars to try to build 50,000 affordable housing units, mostly in Vancouver and Toronto. They've got this new company, Creative Housing. They've hired the former city planner for the city of Toronto to try to make this a reality. It's very interesting because Ian Gillespie's company, Westbank, has been very aggressive in selling these luxury condos overseas. The Vancouver House is one of them. The Shangri-La is another one of them. Also TELUS Garden, headquarters of TELUS, which is also a high-end condo development too. These projects were sold overseas. They've had a lot of marketing events over in Hong Kong, over in Singapore, and this is a company that didn't sell to locals first. They got involved in a project over in Horseshoe Bay. The West Vancouver District Council said, hey, wait a minute, why don't you sell to locals first? And they did a bit of a superficial campaign to sell to locals, but the problem is that the prices they were charging, not many locals really did buck up, and any locals that did also had, some of them had 10-year visas, were from overseas, from China, for instance, who were spending a little bit of time in West Vancouver and wanting to do more investments. So this is a company that was really part of the problem. In some ways, you can't fault them for that because any company wants to make money. That's what they're in it for their shareholders, for lenders, is to make more money this quarter than the last quarter. And they went for the gold. They wanted to sell things as quick as possible and for as high a price as possible in a market like this. That's what they felt they could do. But now they're turning around and trying to be trying to make themselves look like kind-hearted people being involved in a social housing scheme that will be funded by federal taxpayers. It's almost like they were the ones that started the fire. Now they are the ones picking up the fire hose to put out the fire, and they want the kudos for doing so. I think people will stand back and look at their efforts, look at their history, and judge it accordingly.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after the break.
I'm Greg Johnston, CEO of Carl Data Solutions, an industrial Internet of Things company that provides big data solutions for monitoring critical infrastructure. Carl Data offers machine learning and predictive analytics features to our cloud-based applications to deliver key asset-saving operational insights from massive amounts of data. Carl Data trades on the CSE symbol CRL and the pink symbol CDTAF. For more details on Carl Data, please visit carlsolutions.com.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the NDP government in BC is spending massive amounts to promote two monopolies, ICBC, the car insurance company, and BC Hydro. Why do they have to do that?
They don't have to do that. That's the easy answer. They're doing it anyways. They feel that they've got to tell the public more about the problems at ICBC that we already know about. David Eby is the Attorney General, the minister in charge of ICBC, and he's very effective spokesman for his ministry, and he very effectively deemed and declared the problems at ICBC a financial dumpster fire. That got huge media attention across the province. Every major TV station, every major radio station, every major newspaper, every major website carried that quote and has done a number of stories on the problems at ICBC. It's got a lot of free media attention in the corporate communications business. They call that earned media. That's media that nobody in the corporation or the government had to pay to get. They got a lot of space, a lot of time on media outlets, but they decided anyways to spend at least $800,000. I noticed this campaign was on the YouTube page for ICBC. It's been on radio stations, talking about all the problems that ICBC has accumulated over the years, how they're drowning in red ink, but they've got a plan to try to turn around the vehicle, as it were. That's what they're trying to say. But what they're trying to say is, in 30-second sound bites, is what David Eby has said in his own version of 30-second sound bites. They're spending money they don't have. And ICBC isn't even telling me what their approved budget is for the campaign. So it appears that they're rapidly driving towards $1 million expenditure. They will only own up to right now, or at least last week, as of last week, they said $795,000 was spent with an ad agency called Wasserman out of Vancouver to run these ads, these woe is me type of ads. I mean, this is money that ICBC can't afford on its own. There's been talks that David Eby last August said that this Crown Corporation, the Crown monopoly, is on the path to insolvency. So this is really outrageous that it is spending even an extra dollar. If the NDP was smart politically, they would put out a news release and say they're cutting advertising spending. Instead of spending more, they should be doing less. They shouldn't even be advertising on this. This is irresponsible to the hilt. And on the same token, I did a story as well about BC Hydro and its latest ad campaign. It's energy-saving campaign. Power Smart is always the slogan, and they've got someone that they say is a worker at BC Hydro, Dave, who goes into the house of a family, their last name is the Beaupurai family, and tells them as they walk around their house how they can have a more efficient energy-saving house and how they can save money. All noble things. We should all be being more energy efficient these days, and it would save us money. Absolutely great idea. But BC Hydro is spending $1.8 million. That's also money that BC Hydro doesn't have right now, especially since everyone in the province who uses electricity will be hit with another hike. As of April 1st, there'll be another 3% increase to electricity bills. That's after the BC Utilities Commission gave thumbs down to the NDP government's application for a rate freeze that the NDP promised during its election campaign last year. So there you go. They're spending $1.8 million on this phase of this mid-February to mid-April energy-saving campaign, part of their annual budget for conservation-related advertising of $3 million. Again, government advertising, government waste.
Do you feel when they said they'd have a rate freeze that they knew full well the BC Utilities Commission would reject it?
I don't know if they knew it would be rejected. The big wild card, the big elephant in the room, the big elephant in the province is the Site C dam. And that is another pressure on the on the books for BC Hydro. So Oregon decided last December to go ahead and complete what the BC Liberals had started. The BC Liberals started this whole mega project without doing due diligence, without letting the BC Utilities Commission have this on its plate in the first case, mainly for fear that they thought that the BC Utilities Commission would give thumbs down to the dam and they'd never be able to build it. So, Horgan made that very difficult decision, which got maybe half of his base angry, the environmental base of the NDP angry, but decided to go ahead with it to the pleasure of the industrial union base of the NDP. So that's placing major cost pressure on ICBC. That's got to be factored in as well. So I think that they thought that definitely the BC Utilities Commission would be the ones that would make the ultimate decision. But I don't think that they really factored in. I don't know if they necessarily were ready to govern per se, or knew exactly what the books were going to look like. But that really does look like egg on their face when they issue a news release last fall saying that they're going to freeze BC Hydro rates, when in fact they were going to make an application to the BC Utilities Commission to ask them if they could freeze it. The BC Liberals, on the other hand, were kind of disingenuous and calling them out for a politically motivated announcement. When the BC Liberals, when they were in power, they did the same things. They played fast and loose with BC Hydro rates, and they sometimes even tried to overrule the BC Utilities Commission. This is just what governments seem to do here in BC, whoever's in power. And except for the people, the minority of people who are hardcore supporters of these parties, there's the rest of us in the middle just wanting good services delivered for a reasonable price and no waste.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the pink CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Bob Mackin. Bob, Vancouver possibly could build for the 2026 World Cup, but is the city being pressured to build things it can't afford? And FIFA, I would think, has a treasure chest of money already. Why can't they pay for any improvements?
Well, there would probably be some building that would have to happen at BC Place and temporary structures as well, but wouldn't have to build a whole new stadium. That's the good news there. By the time in 2026 World Cup would happen, that would be about 15 years after the renovation at BC Place. BC Place in Vancouver is one of a number of cities that are on a long list that if there is the successful bid by the United Bid Committee, which is really an American-run bid with help from Mexico and Canada, there would be about 60 games played in the United States, and then about 10 in Mexico, and then about 10 in Canada. BC Place in Vancouver was on the list. Now it appears they may not be as of today. I don't believe this story is over yet, but as it looks right now, is that the bid is not going to include Vancouver, which is an interesting surprise since Vancouver hosted the 2015 Women's World Cup final, and that drew about 27 million TV viewers in the United States alone because the U.S. team was in it and beat Japan. That was a successful tournament here, but a tournament that also included a lot of taxpayer subsidies. The budget for the Women's World Cup in 2015 was about $90 million, and it required about $27 million in taxpayer subsidies at least. And FIFA, when it does these big tournaments, they go knocking on the doors, cap in hand, to the governments in those jurisdictions because they know that governments and politicians and their supporters love to get the attention, and they play upon that, and they hire public relations companies to boost these tournaments and make them sound bigger and better than they really are. I mean, World Cup games in Vancouver would be, a boost to the city's brand, absolutely, and there'd be some people that would make some money, but there's no way that having 3, 4, or 5 World Cup games in Vancouver would have any economic benefit anywhere near $500 million. That's absolute ludicrous accounting. So the Horgan government has decided to negotiate hard and say they will not write a blank check to FIFA to pay for essentially hosting rights of this tournament as part of this whole bid. And the organizers have turned around and said, okay, fine, then we're not going to include you. This is an interesting impasse right now because it looks like British Columbia is the only jurisdiction in North America that is saying no to this and actually is looking at this in a very, very pragmatic fashion, which is very interesting in this day and age. And I think it's indicative of what's happened to the world sports business, how very few cities want big events anymore. The Olympics, the IOC is out there trying to find cities that will take it. When it comes to the World Cup, you've got a situation that Russia and Qatar got the 2018 and 2022 tournaments, respectively, through corrupt means. And you've also seen evidence that there was corruption in the bids for South Africa 2010 and even for Germany in 2006, that money was changing hands and filling the pockets of people at FIFA because they felt that they had the power to do so, and there were people that wanted to fill their pockets. And in the case of this 2026 tournament, that if the North American bid wins, the broadcasters who have rights, especially Fox in the U.S., are going to pay more for the rights. They will also be able to get more revenue if it does become a North American tournament. So there's a lot of money on the line, and FIFA really doesn't want to pay its own way. This is an organization that, of course, in 2015, the FBI made dozens of arrests of FIFA executives, and some of those cases are still going through court right now. Major international corruption over the marketing of World Cups, over the bidding of World Cups, over the broadcast rights for World Cups. And here you got FIFA knocking on the door of the BC NDP government, wanting Horgan to write a check because it's a big vanity event. Well, Horgan may not be in power in 2026, and the NDP may not be in power in 2026. What kind of benefit would they get as a political entity 8 years from now? And also, what kind of benefit would the provincial treasury get, would the people in Vancouver get, for hosting maybe as many as 3 or 4 early round matches? The World Cup in 2026 will expand to 48 nations. It's already 32 nations in the upcoming tournament. Russia. There's even a matchup in Russia of Panama and Tunisia. So there would be more of those kinds of matchups likely for a city like Vancouver to host. And what kind of economic benefit, tourism benefit, would we get for hosting a match between countries like Panama and Tunisia? Of course, the draw might give a host city a chance to host a game featuring Germany or Brazil or Italy, one of the glamour teams, which has a big international brand. But there's no guarantee. So why should British Columbians write a blank check to FIFA, which has $1.27 billion in the bank? Why should British Columbians write a blank check to FIFA, which spent about $50 million in 2016 on legal bills alone to fight or to deal with its own corruption? Why can't FIFA be happy enough to go and bring a tournament to a city that would welcome it? Why does FIFA have to be on the dole, essentially, especially when it brings along these big corporate sponsors and big broadcasters? So there will be some flack for Horgan from maybe even some of his base. People in soccer, there's a lot of them that do support the NDP and may be unhappy with this. But then again, there could be some people that would be, even BC Liberal supporters who might look at this and say, well, actually, that's being fiscally prudent. Why should British Columbians subsidize one of the biggest sports businesses in the world, which has enough money to pay its own way, when we're trying to balance budgets and trying to deal with debt provincially? And especially when community soccer fields should be where British Columbians put their dollars.
BC returning back to photo radar?
Yeah, that's what's happening. Although Mike Farnworth, the Solicitor General, doesn't like to call it that, they're converting intersection cameras, and this is going to take a number of months and probably a lot of millions of dollars to make it happen. Converting intersection traffic cameras into 24-hour cameras, because right now they're really only working most of the daytime. They're not working around the clock. So they're going to convert intersection traffic cameras at certain intersections so that the cameras will not only record people going through yellow lights and red lights, but it will also record their speeds. And so they will be issuing tickets to speeders who go through intersections. And they might also be able to ticket people that speed through on green lights. This is photo radar, a different kind of photo radar from the 1990s, when they were minivans that had police officers inside who were working sophisticated camera systems. This is going to be a different kind of photo radar, but photo radar nonetheless. And the big question will be, will there be any benefit to making the roads safer, or will this be a cash cow that the municipalities will enjoy, because traffic fine revenue essentially goes to the municipalities. This is going to be interesting to watch as it progresses, to see which intersections are chosen, and also to see how it all works, because when you have the government controlling the mechanism for recording the speeds, will they set it at a reasonable level that is going to actually catch those who deserve to be caught, or will it catch the innocent people that may be going 1 or 2K above the limit? Back in the 1990s, they were catching people who were going 61 kilometers an hour in a 50 kilometer an hour zone. People that were going with the flow of traffic. People that really didn't mean any harm on the streets and seemed to have the ability to drive properly and safe, instead of going after the actual excessive speeders. So this is going to be interesting to watch there, but also keep an eye over on the Malahat near Victoria, because the Capital Regional District is making a lot of noise. They're lobbying hard to get the NDP government to set up photo radar on that stretch of highway outside of Victoria. They're not using science. They're using anecdotal information from police officers. But the people at Sense, the anti-photo radar group that's popped up in the 90s that still is around here in 2018, say that no, that the science doesn't necessarily support photo radar cameras there. There's so many other things that can be done to try to encourage lower speeds and safer roads to avoid the major crashes that cost ICBC money and also cost people a lot of misery. So keep an eye on this, because they're going to try to sell it differently. They remember what happened in the 1990s and how when the Liberals came to power in 2001, they basically killed the whole program because it became seen as a cash cow. The government and its supporters are going to do whatever they can to try to make this an emotional issue, an issue all about safety, when it should be about a lot more than an emotional issue. It should be about the best data possible and the best science possible, because the question is, are our roads engineered properly? Are the speeds that are properly set and decided? Or is this just another way for municipalities to get more money out of our pockets without having to raise property taxes?
What was a Liberal MP doing meeting with Coast Capital Savings? Who was it, and what were they up to?
Well, Randeep Sarai, his name has been in the news recently. He's the Surrey Centre Liberal MP. He's no longer the head of the Liberal Party of Canada's Pacific Caucus. He was forced to resign that after the ill-fated Trudeau trade mission. I use that very loosely. Some would call it a holiday in India with his family. The situation where Jaspal Atwal showed up at some of those events. He was invited to some of those events to be with the Prime Minister and his family. Jaspal Atwal, of course, was jailed back in the 80s for attempting to kill a visiting Indian cabinet minister in Vancouver Island. He was a Khalistani separatist, a terrorist at the time. Well, Randeep Sarai took the fall for that invitation, and I dug a little bit deeper to find out what is going on with Randeep Sarai. Well, turns out that he, before he became a politician, he had, along with a couple of business partners and his numbered company, some real estate out in Abbotsford, less than an acre of real estate, a parking lot that they wanted to turn into a 5-story commercial building. And so they had a loan from Coast Capital Savings, but in 2012, Coast Capital Savings went to court and said that they were in default and they wanted to be repaid, about $1.5 million or so. Well, here you have Randeep Sarai, a couple of years later, becoming the MP, and even before he was an MP, a judge ruled against him and his business partners that the money was owing to Coast Capital Savings. Money wasn't actually starting to flow to Coast Capital Savings through the court until February of this year. But last October, Randeep Sarai, at his office on Parliament Hill, he hosted a number of executives from credit unions, and one of them was from Coast Capital Savings, Vice President Dave Cunningham, the communications vice president. And I tried to find out more about this from both Coast Capital Savings and also Randeep Sarai. Unfortunately, Mr. Sarai did not return my phone calls or email to explain about the situation with his land holdings, his real estate, or about this meeting he had with the Vice President of Coast Capital Savings. Coast Capital Savings tells me that this was just a part of the annual event that the credit union trade has every year in Parliament Hill. They go and visit their local MPs as part of a government relations lobbying exercise, and just drop in at their office and say hello and remind them of what the important work the credit unions do in their communities. The important part of this, though, is that Coast Capital Savings is trying to expand nationally. They want Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau to eventually give them the approval after the Financial Commission Superintendent hopefully gives them the approval. They want Finance Minister to give them the rubber stamp so they can become a national credit union, so they can expand outside of BC. Well, the MP in Surrey, where they are located, is Randeep Sarai. He's the hometown MP. But here you have the other dynamic of having the hometown MP also be someone that does business with that credit union and someone that owed money to that credit union and still was meeting with the executive of the credit union and not reporting the situation with his legal troubles to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. Some serious questions about how and whether Mr. Sarai is doing anything to separate his personal financial businesses, his real estate investments, from his important duties that he was elected for in 2015. There should be no question that a politician who's elected to office should be giving his undivided attention and loyalty to the people and putting his personal financial businesses and real estate investments, put that on hold or put it aside at arm's length.
Does that just goes to show how weak the conflict of interest legislation is for federal politicians?
It has been said by people who watch this even closer than I do that instead of the Conflict of Interest Act or Conflict of Interest Commissioner position, they should just call it the No Conflict of Interest Act or the No Conflict of Interest Commissioner, because that's what it seems to be, that it's not very well policed. We find very few politicians get their hands slapped at all anymore for conflict of interest, because it seems like no one who is paid to do so is watching over their shoulders and making sure that they give the public the undivided loyalty and that they're not playing both sides of the fence or spending time on personal business when they should be doing public business. And at the same time, the laws are not strong enough to really scare these politicians into doing the right thing. The fines aren't as high as they should be, and neither are the penalties. So that's a big question there. There's organizations like Democracy Watch, which are constantly finding problems with politicians in different governments across Canada not behaving properly when it comes to conflict of interest legislation, and finding that basically they seem to be doing so. They seem to be looking for loopholes when they can, because there's nothing to really scare them into doing the right thing and park their business, put it in a blind trust. Some politicians seem to see this as a career move. Spend a couple of terms in federal government or provincial government somewhere, or even as mayor, get out of that, become a lobbyist, or get into another kind of business and profit from what you did while you were working for the people. that's not something that the people really want to hear about, but that's what does happen.
Bob, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.